Hello, this is Alan Freeman, and this is Drawing with Alan. This is episode 1, and I made a 2-hour version. And anyway, this is the 30-minute version, so I'm going to quickly go over what I was doing here. My sketch is based on this Deadpool illustration that I printed out, and mainly I just used the outline to get the pose, a general pose of him jumping. And that's really all I got from the Deadpool. And then I just used the picture to sharpen my paintbrush. Anyway, I'm using super black. It looks like a Japanese ink. It's a pretty dark black. Works really well. And here we go. This is, I'm using a Winsor Newton 7, Series 7 sable brush. It's a number 2. And also I was using a marker. It's a Faber-Castell. I believe that's the name. And it's fine, and it works like a brush basically, except the tip tends to be unpredictable for me. I'm used to using a brush and it's always the same tip. So this is a little more of a challenge with the pen. You got to be a little more precise. It takes me a little longer. Anyway, I'll use that when I get lazy and just want to add a few little details and don't want to get the brush all wet again with ink. Okay, here we go. And yeah, I'm just flying through this. This is really how fast I ink. I wish. While I was working on this, I was talking about I was talking about my first job out of college, but I don't know if I have time on this 30-minute version. I'll try. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Western Kentucky University. I got that in 1978, and that led to my first job. This company, Hitchcock Fleming and Associates, contacted the college. They contacted one of my teachers. He was doing the technical rendering and airbrush classes, and I was in one of his classes one day when he asked the whole class who would like to have their work sent to a company in Akron, Ohio, and possibly get a job there doing photo retouching and illustration with airbrush. And so I held up my hand, and it realized quickly I'm the only one that raised my hand. And I thought, really? Because you'd think there'd be more people eager, wondering what they're going to do out of college. How am I going to stay in art, keep doing art? It's pretty hard when you don't have any experience and you need to get that start, get your foot in the door. So anyway, he helped me. And I ended up getting flown to Akron that summer of '78. And I met Elno Schwartz, who was their senior illustrator. He was probably in his 60s, which I am now. And he was hard to work with. And I later found out that a lot of people had tried to do the job that I was going to do, retouching tires and tools and illustrating with airbrush, but they just couldn't work with Elno because he was hard to work with. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, and then I told the story of my first work there. He gave me. They would take different shots of tires, different angles, like top down, and then looking straight in the tread, straight on, and then a 3/4 view left and right, etc. And the photos, this was for Goodyear. The photos would just be all the same shade of gray, basically, because the light would just absorb in the rubber of the tire would just absorb the light. Anyway, right now I'm showing how I learned to paint these lines in the tire photos. And I would, first thing that Elno taught me was to hold the brush the way you see me holding it now. And that way you're using your elbow and you get a bigger arc to make a smoother curving lines. And where if you hold it like you're writing a letter, you can only move your wrist so far. So it's harder to get that smooth curve. So I'm just showing here what I learned from all those years. I was there 5 years, doing a lot of tires, and you have to paint in all the little, they call sipe lines, which are the little tiny lines in the tire tread. You have to paint those back into the photo after you've airbrushed the surface of the tire. There's a lot of steps involved. Anyway, my first job there, he wanted to show me what to do with the tires. He gave me a large, like foot long photo of a tire, and it took me about 2 days because you have to trace all those lines. Then you have to cut frisket paper to airbrush the front surface of the tires, and then you have to go in and hand paint all the sight lines back in. Well, that's like 2 days of work, and I thought I did a great job, and I show it to Elno, and he looks at it for a moment or two, and then he tears up the photo and throws it away. And I was a little bit shocked, and he goes, well, you cut the lines for the frisket just a tiny hair over. You're supposed to stop exactly on each point that you want to cut out. Otherwise, those little extra cuts would show up in a photo when they reshoot the tire after you've retouched it. Anyway, I learned my lesson quickly on that one. And from then on, eventually, a few weeks, and I had it down. And then they were happy with me. And then they told me, that's when they later told me that they had tried 4 or 5 other people in that position, and they just couldn't cut it. They couldn't do it exactly the way Elno wanted it done. So I felt like I had crossed a hurdle there. And anyway, let's get back to what I'm doing now. I'm inking in with the Series 7 brush, number 2. I'm trying to get his cape. The other thing I was talking about in the longer video of this inking, that I also posted on my YouTube channel, was what is steampunk, because this is a steampunk character, and a lot of people don't seem to know what steampunk is. It's just a genre of cosplay, fantasy, set in the 1800s to, say, 1910 or something, 1920 even maybe, but it's based on fantasy. Everything looks like it's back in those days. Everyone's got goggles, and girls have corsets on, and these little hats. It's just you'd have to research it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But it's based on 2 old movies that had items that were built, technologically built, by wood and brass and springs and things like that, but they're doing fantasy things like the submarine 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's able to do all these crazy things with just those minimal brass and steam power. And then the movie H.G. Wells' Time Machine, same thing, where it just looks like simple things put together, but they're doing these, he's going in time travel. So anyway, you'll have to research for yourself, but this is Dean Lacrone and I came up with Dr. Peepers' character about 8 years ago, something like that, and Dean's taken it even further with more costume, better outfit, shoes, boots, and just kept improving everything. He's got an mechanical arm, which I'm going to put in the next illustration I do. These images of Dr. Peepers that I've done 3 now recently are all going in a magazine that Dean and I and some other people that are volunteering to help and want to be in our comic magazine that we're going to put out this year. So now I'm showing how I ink these little sipe lines for the tires. You just do this all day long. You do all these little lines are the same, but it really was training for me to ink comic books, which I did pretty much in the late 80s and early 90s. And it helped me with painting as well. So I did comic covers for now, comics, and those were all by hand with airbrush. Anyway, I'm just flying along here, inking, and now I'm going to show you this Faber-Castell. The marker I showed you before is one down below, but the one I'm using now is like the F there, and I'm just going to do some quick outlining of the gun, and then I'll come back with the brush and give it a little more character. But since it's a little more technical, sometimes I would even use a straight edge on this, but more and more I've found that if you can do it freehand and still get close, it has a little more life to it than if you're using templates and straight edges. It takes practice to get a fairly straight line, on your own, and those curves. But it's just something you develop with lots of practice. And I have inked a lot of comics, like I said, back in the 90s, early 90s, mid 90s even. So I did a lot of inking, and I do all the straight lines with the pen, similar to this one. And then I would do the brush for as much as I could with the number 2 or a 3 Sable Winsor Newton 7, Series 7. So here I go, flying along. Oh, and also I had mentioned I didn't like the way I started inking his foot there at the bottom, so I just kind of skipped that over. And then I'm going to white out the bottom and totally redo his bottom foot. This is the first time I'd tried to talk and ink at the same time, but I've now discovered I should do it this way, where I just ink it and film myself and then come back with a voiceover like I'm doing this time. It's way simpler because now I can concentrate on what to say, where before I'm trying to do both. I'm trying to concentrate on when I'm inking, and evidently that takes more of my brain power than I thought because it took me 2 hours to ink just half of this image when usually I could do it in, maybe 30 minutes. I don't know, 30, 40 minutes I could have done it. Anyway, we're in 12 minutes in, so we're almost halfway. And yeah, the other video, the 2-hour version of this, I go into a lot more detail of my work that I used to do. I worked at that ad agency, and I also started doing illustrations on my own while I was working there, where they had free time. I would do paintings, and then they saw those and eventually put them into their catalog of things they would show their clients. So then I started illustrating Goodyear blimps and other items. I did one of phono cartridges that go on a record player, needles, and they're all flying through space, things like that. And I might pop some of those up here in the video if I have a chance. And yeah, you can see some of my inking technique here. I'm also planning to do a comic strip for the magazine we're doing. And my idea is to take like a 1930s Superman or something similar comic and then make it Dr. Peepers, so it'll look like it was done back in the 30s. And it should be a little easier to do too, because the art seemed to be somewhat simple, much simpler then than it is now. I think. So here I am inking this gun. I just sort of made it up from a couple of different guns, that props that I've had in the past. I've got one with like the multi-barrel, and then I had another with the like hoses coming off of it. Basically all the technological items in steampunk look like they're made out of wood and brass and steam powered, but they could shoot lasers or something, even though they look like they couldn't or shouldn't. And that's the fantasy part of it that's thrown in. It's just a lot of fun, and we go to a lot of conventions. I take photos of everything, and Dean dresses up as Dr. Peepers. There's the Gaslight Gathering in San Diego. We've gone there, and the Art Beat. on Main and Vista. There was a gallery there. It's Alley Art Fest is what it's called now. Alley Art Fest in Vista. Now I'm showing some of the. I just kind of threw together some of my photos of Dr. Peepers, so I could glance over and see how his hat and different items on his costume. I didn't really use any of the poses yet that he has here, but I was just trying to get an idea of what details I needed to add. You don't see as much in this shot, this image I'm working on, but later you'll see I'm going to do one where you see his arm, his mechanical arm that he has, and he uses sometimes. Yeah, I've got an idea for that, where it'll showcase. There it is at the top. You see the mechanical arm. Yeah. And that'll be the next one I do. We'll just have an art gallery as well as comics in the magazine. And hopefully it'll be out this year, this summer. Oh, there's another one. Yeah. And you can see the gun in the large shot here with the multi-barrel pistol. It's a nice prop. It's just very heavy. I don't think it was meant to be anything more than setting on a shelf on a mantle. There's my drawing version of that gun that I did I actually did 3. This is I've done 3 Peepers illustrations recently. Here we go. Should be, yep, one more. Yep, that was a good one for seeing the front of the costume and his creature on his shoulder. That's Driggin. That's a puppet. It's Dean has given it a backstory as well as Dr. Peepers, and he is calling him Driggin. He's part rabbit and part dragon. He rests up on his shoulder there, and when Dean goes to these different events, he's going to Ren Fair. They have a steampunk day at Ren Fair, or steampunk weekend, every year. And you'll have maybe 50, 60, 70 people dressed up in steampunk in their own characters. It's fascinating. But little kids would see Driggin on his shoulder, and he can make it move. There's these cables that come down inside of his coat in the back, and he can turn those, and make him turn his head and move around, and just freaks them out. They're either scared and run away, or they want to come up and pet it. It's one or the other. It's cute, though, to see their reactions, because they really think it's alive. Because it does look pretty real. Now, my drawing here, it's a little cartoony-ish version of it. But really, it looks more like a vulture-ish bird creature with sharp teeth. Yeah, so I'm hoping to do some more of these videos and just talk. And like I say, I'll probably voice over so I can concentrate on whatever I'm drawing and inking, and then I can talk about it later like this and not multitask as much. I'm about to I was going to take a break here when I was working on this, and I didn't. Instead, I turned the camera off, but that's when I whited out the foot and redrew it. Oh, here we go. I was showing about how large original art is. And this is an original art page from 1997 of Spectacular Spider-Man, number 17. Sensational Spider-Man, number 17, page 20. And Spider-Man's in like all 3 panels, which is pretty cool. Rich Case is the artist. He mainly was known for inking Waringo, who was an artist, a very good artist, who did mostly Fantastic Four. But then he inked Waringo on that same issue, but in the last 5 or 6 pages, Rich Case did all the work himself, and he's very talented as well. And I picked this up on eBay. not like last year. And it's like 11 by 17. I believe that is the size they'd use now, probably since the 80s. It's been pretty much like 11 by 17. Um, Before that, it was a little larger. It was more like 12 by 18 or something, just slightly larger in the golden age of comics. Um, but now they're that size. So I was just talking about how this will be reduced about half when it's in the magazine, something like that. And it makes everything look even tighter, and that's why they do it larger and then shrink it down. Just makes everything look cleaner, sharper. And now I'm about to finish the pistol up and then get onto the Driggin, which will be the next big thing. And then, let's see, we're at 20 minutes. We only have 10 minutes to go. Flying along this time. But I still recommend, if you've got the time and maybe you're working on something else, you can at least listen to my audio on my 2-hour version of this, because I go into a little more detail. Plus, I'm talking about the kneaded eraser and how well that works, how basically to use it, a couple different techniques to where you won't erase the black off. But the paper I'm using has got a little tooth to it. It's like a pad. I pulled it out of the pad, and so that ink can get into the paper well, and then it won't easily erase off, which is good. Now, one thing I didn't go into in the long version of this video is the fact that after I was all done, I scanned it, and it was too big for the scanner, so I had to scan it in 2 parts and then line it up in Photoshop, and then contrast, and brighten up the background, a few things like that, and clean it up in Photoshop as well. But I honestly tried to make this one look, the original look, like the finished piece. I could have stopped sooner and then cleaned up the white areas or where the black went too far. I could have done all that in Photoshop and it'd been real easy, but I wanted the actual original to look the best it could, so I took that little extra time. I got the graphic white out, and then I touched up everything on the art, and that's how they have always done the original art, even in the past, especially in the past, before computers, whatnot. They had a lot of white out where they correct things, and they would even, like if they want to redraw his hand or something, they would sometimes do it on another piece and then glue it over that one. Whatever it took to get the book out on time, they would do all the shortcuts they could. Here I am working on Driggin. He's got this kind of a metallic nose area in his lizard eyes. But I just keep dipping it in the ink, and then I use a piece of scrap there to keep the point sharp. It works really well. Now, I've used India ink. It seems to be a little thicker, and it doesn't seem to go as far. So I'm pretty happy with this super black that I had, and I just found it on Amazon. And these brushes were probably from like Blick's art site, website. But Michael's also has all this stuff too, so locally you can probably pick these same items up. The brushes are a little bit more expensive than some of the others, but it's worth it because they'll last a long time, especially if you keep them. As soon as I'm done with my day, or when I'm not going to ink for a little while, I clean the brush out, and sometimes I'll put a little hand soap or something. The cleaner you can get it, the better, because then it'll last months of inking like this. Now, I've tried other brushes. Some of them cost almost the same, different brands, they just don't last. Sometimes you'll do one drawing, one inking job like this, and they're done, and they just won't hold a point anymore. So it's worth it to get the Winsor Newton Series 7 Sable. And this is what I used back in the 70s when I worked at the ad agency. I used this type of brush for all my stuff, even color painting work. We used gouache. Gouache would go through the airbrush really well, and it would. You made a mistake, you could fix it. It's opaque. So I got to where I used gouache for a lot of things. Now, gouache isn't known for holding up over multi-years like oil will or acrylic even, but the paintings I did I still have, and they're fine. It's only when I have them matted. If I look behind the mat, it's been like 40 years. I'll look behind the mat, and it's a third brighter than it is on the surface that's been exposed. So yeah, if you want to do something more permanent, it would probably be acrylics. But if you're using airbrush, I definitely would recommend the gouache. And I used to use inks too, Dr. Martin's inks through the airbrush. And that was only after I got to where I really knew what I was doing, because those are kind of dangerous. You screw up with the ink and it's hard to fix. It's pretty intense color, concentrated color. Now I'm trying to ink so that the hairs, it looks like he's got fur. And now those are his feet hanging over, holding on to his shoulder. Little wispy. He's got these little wispy hair balls on the ends of his wings. And his tail. His tail was down below the arm. You can just barely see it down there. But I'm just trying to get the essence of hair going here. And the more you put some darks here and there, then it starts to give it some depth. And you see a little bit of a highlight. I've got kind of the light is basically coming from the upper left on this for the most part. And I'm flying along. Yeah, I really wish I could ink this fast. It would really be nice. But I tend to slow down and take my time. And I even stopped. I worked on this the first day. I penciled it. I had the outline, rough outline, like I showed you from the Deadpool. But then I started working in all the make it look like Dr. Peepers and Driggin. That took a while, a few hours, and then I took a break, and then I come back and started inking, and I got about what you saw when this video started. That's about where I was, like about less than halfway. And then I took another break, and I just, once you think you start rushing it a little, you should just stop, because you don't want to rush it at all. You want to concentrate. You want everything. You want all the lines to be where you want them to be. I mean, if you screw up, you're going to take some white and come back later, or scan it and fix it in Photoshop, if that's what you're doing. So you don't really stop. If you screw up, you just keep moving, because you're going to come back and fix everything. Now here I'm darkening the inside of his wing, but then I decided I'd break up that pattern. Now I'm showing you how when I was in airbrush class, and they had these gridded sheets of paper, and we would airbrush these dots on the grid line, where the lines connected. And that's how we practiced coordination with the airbrush, by trying to keep all those dots the same size on the whole page. Now here I am breaking up those lines because he would have some kind of bone structure, muscle in there to move those wings. So I'm just kind of suggesting. Now the other image I showed briefly that I did before, I actually did show where his arms are up in the wing, or the muscle. Now I'm just breaking up some of these white areas. And you can see the leg, the foot, I haven't fixed it yet. Boom, fixed it. That was quick. I whited out the bottom, and then I re-sketched it with pencil. And now I'm inking over that. And I'm showing where on his bottom of his shoe, I had to use some white out and put those treads in there. And here I got a little carried away on the chunky bottom of his boot there. I had to come back later and knock that down a little bit. But I went ahead and inked it as if, that's why it's getting thicker, because I inked it where I wanted it to be, so I knew I'd come back with the white and then even all that out. Yeah, now I've got to put all his shoestrings in, boot strings. That was a little bit of complication there. But, ooh, boom. Let's jump ahead. And his boots are all black, and his outfit's black, so I was trying to get that. Now, most likely I'll try to give this a coloring job. I'll scan it in and color it in Photoshop. But for this image, I just wanted it to look as good as it could in black and white. But yeah, you could save a lot of time if you know you're going to do an elaborate color job on something. You don't need to try to feather everything, all the edges, because you can do it with the color. But I was just having some fun with the inks here. Yeah, we're getting close to the end now. And thanks for watching. Glad you're staying with me here. And the next one I plan to... So thanks a lot for watching, and that's it for Dr. Peepers Jumping, Drawing with Alan #1.